mahor, e giga korave. Iku bloiko, rusula rusju, holaka holala, halagu
Howdy, and welcome back to Film And. It is the most beautiful, warm, sunny day out here in Burlington, Vermont, and on this final day before my college graduation, I couldn't ask for a nicer afternoon to say school's out and happy summer. This is the season finale of Film And Season 6, and for me, this is my final episode. So I thought I would return to a segment we began all the way back in February of 2020 in Season 2. This week, a decade ago, and our final 𝓜𝓸𝓸𝓷𝓻𝓲 will be 2012's classic film Moonrise Kingdom, directed by Wes Anderson. Now, I would argue that Moonrise Kingdom may possibly be one of the most universally beloved films of my generation, and I'd like to think it's easy to understand why. During its release a decade ago, the hipster twee aesthetic that we've discussed about Wes Anderson's films before was in full force and reached kind of a fever pitch, which helped this film to find success in the short term. But I would argue there is something deeper there that resonates with people my age and my generation, and as I am graduating college tomorrow, it seems that the themes played with in Moonrise Kingdom are quite fitting for the time at hand. Because above else, this is a film about childhood's end. Now, I don't love this movie like a lot of my contemporaries do. For example, Connor, who is a huge fan of this movie. I think it's just alright at the end of the day, but it's one of those movies that, for one reason or another, it doesn't resonate with me, but I respect it on a very high level for what it's trying to do. And what I do love, I truly love from this movie. So let's get into it. Heavy spoilers coming up on all of this movie. You've had a decade to watch it, so here we go. I assume most of you know this movie, so we're going into it. Despite people often looking to 2014's Grand Budapest Hotel as kind of the contextual king of Anderson's filmography, garnering 9 Academy Award nominations and walking away with 4 wins, I don't think that this success would have been possible without the groundwork that Moonrise Kingdom kind of laid out. In what I consider the first leg of his career, Wes Anderson directed 6 films, all of varying budgets and success. You have the star-studded Royal Tenenbaums that put him somewhat on the map of sorts, and follow-ups like Life Aquatic and 𝓸𝓷𝓻𝓲𝓵 are, for some reason, still kind of maligned to this day in his filmography. I can speak to the beauty of 𝓸𝓷𝓻𝓲𝓵, but I have yet to see Life Aquatic, and hell, maybe I'll just watch it after recording this today. He follows us up with his foray into stop motion with Fantastic Mr. Fox in 2009, and finally, we come to Moonrise, 2012. Now, Moonrise Kingdom for me seems like a film of transition of sorts, where Wes Anderson takes the first step into not only a beloved auteur of the 21st century, but also finding success outside anyone who maybe attends the Cannes Film Festival and anyone on the American Zoetrope mailing list. He's gotten to a point where his filmmaking style is getting refined, and not only that, has the budget and cast to support it. Now, some would argue Fantastic Mr. Fox is in fact the point where this occurs, as plenty of people my age hold that film quite dearly as well. But with Wes Anderson establishing himself in the film world with live-action films, Moonrise feels like such success on a myriad of levels. And it also feels like the true part 1 of the transition of Wes Anderson. Part 2, in a way, being Grand Budapest. So first, plotline. Moonrise Kingdom is a 2012 American coming-of-age comedy-drama film, if you didn't already know, directed by Wes Anderson. It's written by Wes Anderson and Roman Coppola, and stars Bruce Willis, Edward Norton, Bill Murray, Frances McDormand, Tilda Swinton, Jason Schwartzman, Bob Balaban, and introducing Jared Gilman and Kara Hayward as the 2 main characters.
All 3! 1, 2, 3!
Largely set on the fictional New England island of New Penzance, it tells the story of an orphan boy, Gilman, who escapes from a scouting camp to unite with his pen pal and love interest, a girl with aggressive tendencies, Hayward. Feeling alienated from their guardians and shunned by their peers, the lovers abscond to an isolated beach. Meanwhile, the island's police captain, played by Bruce Willis, organizes a search party of scouts and family members to locate the runaways before the arrival of Child Services, played by Tilda Swinton, to take Sam away. The island of New Penzance, as is with any central location in a Wes Anderson film, be it the Tenenbaum Mansion or the Darjeeling Limited Train or the Grand Budapest Hotel, is full of uniquity and vibrant visual dressings. It's as much a character as the cast, albeit a silent one. One way I kind of relate this point is that the weather at most times is reflecting the emotions of the film. Not necessarily the emotions of the characters, but I would argue more times the emotions of the audience. That's kind of getting portrayed and given life in the weather and overall natural environment that the characters live in. It's a fine line to tread there, though, because sometimes maybe you're just feeling what the movie wants you to feel, and with such a weather-centric plot, it seems like that may just be the case, honestly, but I feel like the weather is showing us so overtly how the island itself is reacting to these characters living out their lives as a passive observer, just like us, the audience. But the island, or the greater character that is nature in this movie, still has the power of the final storm to get a word in edgewise. To be honest, where this film succeeds for me most on the visual front of this island's design and how Wes Anderson fills it with such life is in some of his most real and least stylized moments. Bob Balaban's dawn weather report on the day of the storm, the casual observations of New England nature through Susie's binoculars, and the natural beauty of mile 3.25 tidal inlet, which kind of leads me into the discussion of the overall idea of this film, why I wanted to kind of talk about this in the first half of the episode. What is Moonrise Kingdom? Or more importantly, what was Moonrise Kingdom? As dreamlike and whimsical as the name suggests, we learn that at the end of the film that the mile 3.25 inlet, where Sam and Susie made their camp to live at before being discovered, is in fact Moonrise Kingdom. There was even a scene while they are on the beach where Sam paints Susie with her kitten, and they both agree that mile 3.25 tidal inlet has no ring to it. I agree, it doesn't really. And that they should rename it. Susie is given a minute to think about a new name.
I like it here, but I don't like the name.
Me neither.
Mile 3.25 tidal inlet. It's got no ring to it.
Let's change it. What should it be?
Let me think for a minute.
And we're never told what it is. Until the end. Moonrise Kingdom, for me, is the symbolic place where Sam and Susie escape from the terrifying reality of childhood's end and imagine a dream life, away from the cares and the nightmares of adulthood. With Sam's dead parents and unempathetic scout lifestyle and Susie's parents, their marital struggles, no wonder they have no reason to want to grow up, or even be a part of the society that they are stuck in, especially when the parallels of adults just being bigger children is so overt. The adult khaki scout leaders, played by Edward Norton and Harvey Keitel, are just childish role models of sadistic scouts that kind of revel in chasing after Sam for the sake of really just being bullies. But as the storm rolls in and the film progresses, the fellow kids get wise and do work to help Sam and Susie reunite. And one by one, as the storm worsens and the world closes in to tear Sam and Susie apart, what their relationship represents to each other is a sense of simple joy and beauty that a lot of the adults have long lost. I mean, so many adults in this movie come to the revelation that for so many people, we not only grow out of childhood with our bodies, but we also grow out of childhood in our minds. And there are some lessons from that time in our lives that we shouldn't soon forget. And despite the happy ending that most of the characters all receive, there is no denying that the sort of bittersweet feeling they all live in now. Sam is adopted by Bruce Willis's character, the sheriff police officer on the island, and Susie returns to her family life, both all matured and smaller versions of the adults they will soon become, and perhaps more mature than their own role models and guardian figures. But as the final scene of the film reiterates, things have inevitably changed, and the days of our youth are precious and fleeting, and our time at Moonrise Kingdom must come to an end. And the most we can do to return to those days is to allow ourselves to remember them. We'll be right back.
Running late to class but still need that morning caffeine or hot breakfast to start your day out right? Download the Bite app by Sodexo and place your custom order for fast, easy pickup at Zyme. Open 8:30 a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. Mondays through Fridays.
All right, everybody in the car, let's go.
What are we gonna do first when we get there, Mom? Go for a hike?
Sure.
What about canoeing? Can we go canoeing too?
I don't see why.
How long does it take to get to the forest?
It's not that far, sweetie.
Are we there yet?
Yep, we're here.
Already?
It's a short drive from your neighborhood to your naturehood. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a neighborhood park or green space near you. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the U.S. Forest Service.
The flashlights beamed a moon through the black across the attic and settled on a gap in the baseboard, a mouse hole no bigger than a pocket watch. Eric crouched on his flat feet and placed his hand in front of the tiny opening. "It's windy," he said, "like someone in there's blowing on my fingers." Christy rolled her eyes and sighed a sigh. He's right again, she thought. Little brothers drive people crazy.
I'm listening. Read on.
Part 2.
All right, howdy, and welcome back to Film and the Season 6 finale, Episode 13. We are discussing Moonrise Kingdom on another edition of This Week, A Decade Ago, where we talk about films that came out this week, a decade ago. And to sort of switch gears here from discussing the film itself, which I imagine most are familiar with, I want to kind of discuss the legacy of the film in the greater decade context, because it has indeed been 10 years now since we were treated to this film, and what a 10 years it has been. We've even since gotten 3 more films from Wes Anderson: Grand Budapest, Isle of Dogs, and most recently, The French Dispatch. And we have another one on the way pretty quickly. I mean, if you recall, French Dispatch was actually delayed due to Fox and the greater Fox Disney company wanting to wait till they can release it in theaters to actually make a good buck off of it. So we had to wait like a year for this movie. So it kind of us waiting for French Dispatch to come out kind of worked in our favor, in the sense that we don't have to wait as long for the next Wes Anderson film, which I believe is called Asteroid City right now. I'm very intrigued to see what that one's going to be. I've heard tell that it's possibly a Western, and I would love to see a Wes turn from Wes Anderson. Oh my God. But back to Moonrise Kingdom. May of 2012. I believe it's May 16th, where it premieres at the Cannes Film Festival. And only 2 weeks later, it is in theaters around the world, and upon its release, the film is critically acclaimed and received well by audiences. And this success, I think, really goes on to inform the rest of Anderson's work from this point. I mean, the following 3 films we get from Anderson, I feel like are similarly grander in scale, like an improvement on the production value and tools Anderson now has access to. With his reputation, he is never short on cast or stunning visuals that allow for an immersive and enjoyable experience for anyone watching or participating in making the film. And with this kind of secure position in the film industry, he has the freedom to make what he wants. After Moonrise, I feel like he goes on to create a more ambitious period piece in Grand Budapest, a more ambitious stop-motion film with Isle of Dogs, and a more refined analysis of aesthetics and influence with French Dispatch. And this is also where I make an interesting parallel to another director, loved by film nerds, Quentin Tarantino. And this is a quick aside, but it seems fascinating to me, and I want to mention it. And perhaps this is telling of the changing film industry that we've seen the past 20 years, but the mid-2000s is the final time we've been given present-day films from either Tarantino or Wes Anderson. For Tarantino, Death Proof was his last film that could reasonably take place in contemporary time when the film was being shot, with the use of 2000s cell phones being kind of one of the few things that gives this away. After that point, we get the World War II film *Inglourious Basterds, the 19th century films *Django Unchained* and *Hateful Eight*, and *Once Upon a Time in Hollywood*, straight out of summer 1969. For Anderson, 2007's *Darjeeling Limited* is perhaps the last modern film of Anderson's, and if you don't include the 2 animated films, which I don't really, they feel like period pieces in a sense, and even if they aren't, they're kind of in their own animated universe, we get Moonrise Kingdom from the 1960s, particularly September 1965, Grand Budapest, which kind of skips around the 20th century, and similarly, French Dispatch, bouncing around a couple time periods in the 20th century. So, why? Why is this? I think that maybe Moonrise Kingdom is one of the first auteur films, along with *Inglourious Basterds*, that gets wise to the fact that it is becoming increasingly hard to invoke nostalgia in the modern era of filmmaking. I guess Tarantino and Anderson both invoke a style and visual aesthetic of filmmaking that they grew up around, and with their positions in the industry, they are allowed to continue this tradition, shooting on film, using older tricks and aesthetics that are more like cinema that we might have seen in the 60s and the 70s. And I don't think we'll ever see an Anderson or a Tarantino film that takes place in the 2020s. I mean, if you try to imagine it, like them telling a story that happens in the current day, I think it feels weird. Like, I can't really see that. Yet we were getting contemporary films of theirs in the 90s and the 2000s, so what changed? Well, I think they both achieved a pretty high level of success within the 90s and 2000s, and I would say that they both adapted to the changing film landscape with the dawn of digital filmmaking being a primary device across the board. A Wes Anderson film looks different, yes, than most films, but Royal Tenenbaums and Rushmore seem to blend in better with the cinema of their time than a film like Moonrise, because in many ways it's transcending any filmmaking aesthetics or practices of 2012. It is striving for its own existence, and if not that, at least pulling from a bygone era of cinema, seeped heavily in the French New Wave and other European cinema at the time. So in terms of modern films with retro aesthetics, Moonrise Kingdom is a goldmine. No one can deny that. But when I look at the lasting impact of how popular retro aesthetic films are, especially the good ones like this, I try to look at what other retro aspects of the film Anderson invokes. And I find one other important point to mention: Moonrise Kingdom and its use of Americana. From frame one, and I mean it, frame number one, the set design, costume design, color palettes, locations, and props are all some reflection or filtering of mid-century Americana. Cross stitches of lighthouses, the quaint wooden structures of bus stops and boat docks, and fenced roads, the underdeveloped footpaths and dirt trails that easily outnumber the paved roads on the island, the underlying existence of the Native American culture and their lasting impressions on the surrounding nature, the nautical themes of houses and businesses reminiscent of Norman Rockwell's illustrations. The list goes on and on and on. I promise you. I mean, this is all Anderson's reflections of the golden age of Americana. This picturesque countryside landscape of a simpler time, which also leans into the theme of the simpler time that is childhood. And in a way, perhaps his childhood as well. Wes Anderson being born in May of 1969, he's only really a stone's throw away from this era of America. So this is all combining in these moving parts that, for the duration of the film, execute the aesthetic quite perfectly. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan of everything personally. I mean, sometimes it feels a bit over the top and honestly self-parodical for sure. And maybe that doesn't exactly feed into my way too serious alt house brain. It's too much. I can't handle it. But that's all right. You know, the respect comes from the intentionality of invoking Americana. which I think is yet another reason that Moonrise Kingdom stands as a powerful film on my collective generation's youth. You know, it is a reminder of the America some of us in the suburbs and countryside lived in during the summer vacations of our childhood. Going to camp, being free, exploring nature, and just soaking in the sun. A great review from Christopher Orr of The Atlantic, who does call this Anderson's best live-action feature, says that Moonrise Kingdom captures the texture of childhood summers, the sense of having a limited amount of time in which to do unlimited things, which I think captures the whimsical beauty of this film through and through. So, a decade down the road, Moonrise has also stood as one of Wes Anderson's best assembled casts. With the help of casting director Douglas Abel, you've got some of the usual suspects, of course. You got Bill Murray, Jason Schwartzman, but you have some fun new faces like Bruce Willis. And I should state that if you look at Bruce Willis, if we're doing another quick aside here, this is also to kind of comment on the sad announcement of Bruce Willis's aphasia diagnosis, which will make him quit acting, which is too bad, but we have what we have. To be honest, this is one of the last major films we get from him, in a way. After 2012, which is a pretty prolific year for him, you have A Good Day to Die Hard and Looper, Expendables 2, and Moonrise Kingdom. After that pretty big year, he's in a couple sequels, the Sin City sequel, Red 2, G.I. Joe, and then eventually he is in Glass and Split, which we touched on last week just for a sec. And then finally, probably Motherless Brooklyn, which is Edward Norton's, I believe, one of 2 films Edward Norton has directed. Beyond then, this is one of those few movies that does kind of stick out as, well, just significant in the greater film landscape. I mean, I ask myself how many people are talking about Moonrise Kingdom and how many people are talking about Red 2 or G.I. Joe Retaliation or any of those films. I think this is one of his last truly unique and special performances that adds to his overall oeuvre, if you will. That and probably maybe Looper, but Looper feels more in his traditional wheelhouse. I mean, it's only every once in a while in Bruce Willis's career that we will get a Die Hard or an Unbreakable or a Pulp Fiction or a Fifth Element. And I think this is just one of those touchstones of his career, one of the last great performances that we're going to get early on in the 2010s. But moving on back to the cast of Moonrise Kingdom, I should say that this, again, talking about Moonrise Kingdom as the beginning of kind of, I think, Wes Anderson's second wave of his career, I think the casting is the most obvious shift of that. This is the beginning of a new era in many ways because it is with this movie that he expands his small list of regular actors and collaborators. And moving forward, we see more familiar faces, such as Tilda Swinton, Bob Balaban, Edward Norton, Harvey Keitel, and Frances McDormand. All of these actors, big-name actors, show up in the next couple Wes Anderson films for the rest of the decade. They all start their careers with Wes Anderson on this movie. And this shift to frequent collaborators with actors only increases on Grand Budapest, which is why I often consider these 2 movies linked as kind of the 1-2 punch of Anderson's career, and also sandwiched in between his 2 animated films. And funny enough, this is also the first movie that he does without Owen Wilson, and this and Isle of Dogs being the only ones that he hasn't been involved in. And this is also the last time we see Wes Anderson's brother, Eric Chase Anderson, appear in one of his movies, as Harvey Keitel's secretary, McIntyre. So, with all of this considered, and despite this being a film about endings, it is equally a film about beginnings. You know, when one phase of our lives end, another begins. And this easily feels like the beginning of a new era for Wes Anderson's career. And from this point on, he'd go on to make some of his most inspired work to date. And a decade later, this film is still deeply thoughtful and witty and beautiful, melancholy and comforting all at once. I can completely understand why this is some people's favorite Wes Anderson, or maybe even their favorite movie in general. I am thinking of my old co-host, Connor. And I guess as for me, that's it. This is where I finish up my time on Film And. I am, as of now, graduating college tomorrow. And, you know, finishing this final episode in these last 2 seasons has been definitely a true joy and honor that I've gotten the chance to do this. Even with the madness of my schedule, doing my senior film and my other classes and keeping up work and everything with life, I'm so happy I was able to do these seasons. And I guess I also want to give a special thank you to all those who've helped this show along the way. Dr. Williams of the Champlain Wave, of course, the administrator, Connor, Stephen Clay, the Three Musketeers. Connor, thank you so much for inviting me on to talk about my 3 favorite animated films like 2.5 years ago. My sister Julia for helping me start up Film Asterisk, which you might see more of down the road if you're listening to the YouTube channel. I love to put out just some Film Asterisk whenever I can, whenever I think of a good idea. And Annika, last week's guest, who, if she can find time, may continue the show on her own terms. As always, you can find any of the movies we talk about here on Film And on my Letterboxd at @DA_N. I have the Film And Letterboxd list. And if you want to see any of the movies we talked about on the first 4 seasons of Film And, you can go to Connor's Letterboxd list at Cranberry18. That is CRAND Berry 18. And that's it. I'm going to get out of this dark radio room and I'm going to take a walk in the sunshine. And I hope you all have an amazing summer. Thank you for listening. And I guess I hope you can all, in your own way, find your own Moonrise Kingdom. See ya.